talk to me about you had a mass casualty event when you were over there in Afghan in 2008. Talk to me about the build up to that and then what happened on the day.
Yeah, so that was we had the luxury of enjoying ourselves at Anzac Day at Tarank out there on the 25th of April 2008. We knew we were going out in vehicles for about a week on the 26th. So we got allocated our 2 beers on the 25th. We enjoyed those 2 beers, and then may or may not have broken into the boozer, what do they call it, lockup, shipping container, and got a couple more beers out. And then the next day we all hopped in our vehicles and drove down south for our week-long patrol, which is, we've done it 5 or 6 times before. But we needed to head through a valley, and there was a village that overlooked the valley that was called Calais. And we received intel, that was like 40 years old, that the Russians had driven through there back in, the 80s, and got blasted with about 70 vehicles that they took through. So the Mujahideen had essentially picked off the first vehicle and they picked off the last vehicle, and then they just wiped out approximately another 60 or so vehicles in between and kind of killed everybody. So it was a dangerous bit of ground to drive through, and we kind of underestimated that village and that piece of land and that pass, and we drove through anyway. And that was kind of fine. We got through it. So this is now on the 27th. But once we drove through, we got a lot of reporting. We had a lot of assets up in the air collecting data and communications for us. And we received information that a lot of the teams assumed we were going to drive back through there. So they went up into the hills where, 40 years before the Mujahideen had been, and took those same positions, firing positions, and kind of waited for us to drive back through. So our hire did a lot of planning and tried to offset that with snipers and some Dutch Apaches and sent us back through. So we went through, and I was in the lead vehicle. So all I'm hearing through our communications guy is, they're talking about hitting us. They're talking about they're going to hit us soon. It's going to be big. It's going to be big. And when you're in the lead vehicle and you can hear all this chatter over the radio that they're about to hit us, it's quite confronting. And there's like a 90-degree turn in Calais, the main village there. We did the left turn, and we had about 12 vehicles, I guess. So after about 4 or 5 vehicles completed that left turn, they arced up on us, and they just went full auto, and RPGs are flying in and heavy machine guns. Pardon me. So the first, 5 minutes, we had 4 casualties, and Jason Marks was hit. And he took an RPG to his vehicle initially. So him and the driver were injured. They got out, they ran to the back, they grabbed some rockets, and we're just about to fire the rockets to the enemy positions when they took some small arms, and Jason was shot in the head, and he died instantly. And one of my other buddies ran from a vehicle behind. He ran like 100 meters to get to Jason. And he copped like a 3-round burst to his legs just as he got there. So we had 4 live casualties. We had Jason, who was KIA. And for the next 2 hours, we were just trying to fight our way out of there. We went back essentially the way we came. We had another team from another platoon come in to provide. They brought a Bushmaster, so they had a lot of armor and some heavier machine guns. And we had Dutch Apaches, which were doing laps over the top. But the Dutch, they're a little bit weird back then. They needed to see the target before they would engage. So, a helicopter sort of moves. Traditionally people think it kind of just hovers there, but it's not going to hover. It's in a pattern, and it's going to keep doing runs. So we had Apaches flying over the top. We would nominate targets, but they wouldn't shoot because they couldn't see the weapon systems on the Taliban. So there was a miscommunication there. So they weren't, within their rules of engagement. They didn't fire. So we were getting more and more rounds and coming in on us. More fighters were coming in from the hills because the word got out that, they could light us up and they were dominating us. So heaps more fighters were coming in, and it was very frustrating as a pilot. So the Dutch Apache weren't shooting. But we eventually got out there a couple of hours later and got back to TK. So that was kind of the first big shootout, I guess, that I was involved in, where we took casualties, and that was quite confronting.
How does the team, platoon, I don't know the correct terminology, regroup after an event like that?
Yeah, so logistically, I guess you look at, we're down 5 guys from our platoon of, say, 35. So, as far as the teams go, that's quite an impact. Every team kind of lost 1 guy equivalent. So we had to get more guys in from Australia to backfill those positions. So they reached back and got another 4 or 5 guys sent over. But you're right, to regroup, to move their equipment out of our team room, for instance, because down at the hospital there before they go to Germany, before they go back to Australia. So there's a logistical element to it as well, to make sure that, the new guys coming in, and, do we pause on operations until every team's operational and got a minimum of 5 guys? So, there's an emotional element to it. There's, I guess, all of us, there's a revenge element to it. Let's go back in there and take out these guys, get some more intelligence, and take the fight to the bad guys again. So there is quite a bit to it. You're right. It's not just a case of, reset and we're off again. There's quite a lot of work that needs to happen.
Is there a mandatory, not a stand down, but a period afterwards that you just, okay, let's take a knee for 24 hours just to regroup emotionally from that? Or is it sort of just depends on what's going on in the field of battle rather, and where you need it? So you may not actually have time to take stock of what happened.
Yes, there is a time frame for that to happen, like you said. So I think when we got back, like a couple of days later, we had a couple of beers because we had to do the ramp ceremony for Jason. So the ramp ceremony means that Australia flies in a C-17 or a C-130 to pick up the casket. So there's a whole procedural element to what happens next a couple of days later. So we essentially do our farewells at TK there, and all the Australians sort of close ranks and come in together. We get representatives from the Brits and the Dutch and the Americans, and it's quite well. It's very well done, and we've sort of walked the casket out. It's in one of the back of the 6-wheel vehicles out to the flight line. It gets loaded up and sent straight back to Australia. So naturally, there's some downtime built into taking a KIA anyway, so we can sort of reflect on it and say our goodbyes, as well as sort of regroup and reposition ourselves for future operations.